And it's time for another book review. I have Deep Nutrition by Catherine Shanahan, MD, over here. And this book is something I read about 3-4 years ago, and it completely changed my perspective about the question of food, about the question of nutrition. How do we make good food choices? How do we discern what is good and what isn't good when it comes to the foods we select? And what Catherine did for me, and what she'll do for you when you read this book, is make you realize that the best approach when it comes to the question of food, what is optimal or what is suboptimal, the best approach is the approach of history, the historical approach. Let's ask ourselves the question, hey, right now in modern times, human beings are getting fat, we're getting sick, we're getting tired. There's an epidemic of disease, cancer, cardiovascular disease, there's anxiety, depression, autism, you name it. All kinds of horrible things are happening in modern times. And really, if you want to understand what the root cause is, well, maybe you should take a step back and say, hey, what's different now compared to how it's always been? And she really points that out, makes it very clear. And what she did is, when it comes to nutrition anyway, she took the commonalities across all cultures with respect to what they eat, no matter whether or not they were from Alaska 10,000 years ago or, Lebanon, whatever it may be. All cultures have 4 things in common. She called them the 4 pillars of the human diet. And those 4 pillars are what you should follow, what we should follow in order to optimize our health when it comes to making food choices. And the 4 pillars are, number 1, eat meat on the bone. Number 2, eat organ meat. Number 3, consume fermented and sprouted vegetables. And number 4, eat raw, fresh foods as often as possible. So the first pillar, eat meat on the bone, really is telling us that we should be consuming meat from the bone. It should be a cut of meat that came from the animal. The bone is still in there, the tendons are still in there, maybe even a little bit of skin. And when we cook it, we cook all of that together, because that's how you're going to derive all the nutritious factors that you need within that food stuff, in order to get the full benefits. And when you consume something from the grocery store that's a lean piece of processed cut meat that has no bone in it, no tendons, isn't packaged the way it was packaged by nature. In other words, you would never find it in that form in nature due to the industrial process. Well, when you eat meat on the bone, you are getting a lot more nutrition. You're giving your body a lot more of what it needs in a package that is complete, right? There's more micronutrients and macronutrients available that otherwise wouldn't be there. There are cofactors that are working together. There are vitamins and minerals that are working together, instead of an isolated piece of muscle tissue that is usually lean. You want to avoid that. You want to get fatty cuts of meat on the bone, tendons, marrow, even skin, all of it together. Cook it all together. It's going to taste a lot better. That's how it was done traditionally for most of human history. We had no other choice. We didn't have industry to create the processing system we have now that allows us to have these artificially lean cuts of meat, which wouldn't have been a delicacy going back 100 years. That's number 1. Number 2 is eat organ meats. Organ meats were a staple in the diet of indigenous people, in our traditional diet throughout human history across all cultures. Organs have a ton of nutrition: livers, kidneys, pancreas, the intestines, the gizzards, the brain. If you eat organ meat, you are consuming the parts and pieces that create that particular organ. If I eat a liver from a chicken or from a cow, veal liver, then that liver that's going in me is going to support my liver, because they're pretty much made of the same thing. If I eat pancreas, it's going to support my pancreas. And it's my organs that decide the health of my body. So you want to eat organ meat. That's pillar number 2. Pillar number 3 is to eat sprouted and fermented plant material, if you eat any at all, right? It's not necessary to eat plant material, but you do have to understand that if you do, you have to prepare it in such a way by fermenting it or sprouting it so that the nutrients inside of it become accessible. The problem with plant-based diets now is that people aren't preparing them in the way that we've traditionally prepared them for centuries. We would ferment the plants before we consume them, like making sauerkraut or kimchi, because it's the fermentation process, the fermenting bacteria acting on the plant material, which allowed the nutrients within that plant to be accessible by our digestive system. We don't have a rumen like a cow. We don't have a specialized microbiome that allows us to break down plant material and cellulose and actually actually suck the nutrients out of that cellulose membrane found in most plant materials. So we have to do something to help the digestive process, right? We are omnivorous, but we're really more set up to be carnivores. However, we could get away with eating more plant material if we ferment and sprout. So that's pillar number 3. And pillar number 4 is eat fresh. Whether it be animal products or whether it be plant products, make sure they're fresh, because for every minute or every day that something is not fresh, it's oxidizing, it's losing nutrients, it's losing a lot of its potential to nourish your body. And so eating fresh is the only way you should be eating, and it's the only way we have been eating for millions of years, because we didn't always have refrigerators in grocery stores. And so that's how it's always been done. So the effect this book has had on my coaching practice, my ability to help my clients, has been the perspective that it shares. It's the idea that ultimately, the question of nutrition is a historical question. It's not about good or bad. It's not about this false dichotomy of, black and white. Either food is good or it's bad. Either it's plant-based or it's animal-based. It's not about that. What it's about is how the human genome has evolved on the planet for millions of years, and whether we're in alignment with nature of how things have always been for those millions of years. And the truth is, in the last few centuries, we've been progressively moving further and further away from that natural state. And the natural state is represented by these 4 pillars. And so, as a coach now, if somebody asks me the question, hey, how do I know if something is good for me or not? Well, I tell them to ask themselves the caveman question. I say, hey, a caveman 15,000 years ago wouldn't have had access to that Twinkie, wouldn't have had access to that bagel, wouldn't be eating a pepper or tomato in the middle of December in Canada, right? So it simplifies the entire issue of, what should I and what shouldn't I eat? What you should be eating is directly related to the 4 pillars of the human diet and is in direct alignment with the natural processes of life as they have been on the planet Earth for millions of years. And so it's a really good book. Highly, highly recommended. She changed the way I look at the question. She changed the way I look at the problem. Catherine Shanahan, Deep Nutrition. Get your copy today or else.